Hi, I'm Keith. I've recently graduated with an Associate of Arts degree in Information Technology at the University of Phoenix Online. I was able to successfully complete the 2-year academic program in under 2 years. Currently, I'm pursuing a bachelor's degree in Information Technology with a concentration on business systems analysis. The first computer in my home growing up was an IBM 386 SX that used the MS-DOS operating system. I was 11 years old at the time. For the first couple years, when using the computer, there was only a black screen with a C prompt. Typing at the command line was the only way to use it. I remember loading video game floppy disks into the disk drive, installing them on the hard drive, and then running them using the command instructions that came with the disks in the box. People that missed that era in computing would probably think it would be awful to be limited to the command line interface, or CLI for short. I remember liking the video games and just accepting it without any real displeasure. About 2 years after getting the computer, the operating system became corrupted. A person came and fixed it, upgrading the operating system to what is probably the most basic of a graphical user interface, and also leaving us with a bunch of new software. Seems like we got a good deal that time. The new operating system used menus in a directory type fashion. It did make using the computer easier. Approximately 12 to 13 years later, when I began using Windows XP, which featured a much more modern graphical user interface, or GUI for short, I instantly became more interested and dependent on computers. But now, after about 8 years of heavy computer use, I find myself wondering more and more about the capabilities of using the command line. Why? Because I never feel entirely secure that something won't go wrong with my computer. There's always that feeling of what if? And when something bad does happen, I am usually temporarily consumed with fixing it. When I think of all the time I've spent using and learning computers, and my commitment as I pursue my education in IT, I would like to be able to solve problems myself and without much difficulty. The task of learning how to use the command line is daunting, and people may think, why bother? And ask, is it worth it? Well, what if it's really not as hard as it seems? What if, in the long run, facility in using the command line would be very beneficial? The command line interface is also referred to as the shell or the terminal. Every operating system has a CLI, and every modern operating system is also likely to have a graphical user interface. So there's not much chance for avoiding the GUI completely. Many people are probably only really comfortable with interacting with a computer through the GUI. But is the same interaction with a computer possible using the CLI as with the GUI? The answer to that question is no. The CLI is the most powerful tool for interacting with a computer. The CLI is a utility for executing commands. The computer executes the instructions it is given by a command. The CLI can be used to perform any function of the operating system, and it is particularly effective for performing advanced administrative functions. Being able to perform any of the functions of an operating system gives the user greater control. A GUI limits the functions that can be performed by a user. Troubleshooting is more effective using the CLI because it provides more detailed feedback. Batching and scripting are two functions that can be performed using the CLI that cannot be performed using a GUI. When an operating system becomes corrupt or damaged, it is still possible to boot a system into safe mode and use the command prompt to attempt to repair or restore the computer. Perhaps the biggest hang-up to using the CLI is its complexity of functions and the complexity of the command syntax. There is also an element of risk because it is very easy to damage a system by entering the wrong command. Favorable aspects of the GUI are that it is designed to be user-friendly and multiple things can be manipulated on screen at once. It is also easy to navigate for beginners. There are many great tools and applications that have been developed for the GUI. Since both the CLI and the GUI have their pros and cons, it is also important to consider the typical users of both of the different types of interfaces and their typical skill levels or characteristics. CLI user types typically include software developers, system administrators, advanced or power users, hardcore users, and nostalgic users. Hardcore users would be those who are familiar with the CLI and prefer to use it for its efficiency. Nostalgic users are also those who prefer to stay with the CLI that they are already familiar and skilled with. GUI user types typically include beginners, average or unsophisticated users, modern users, and therefore almost everyone, and also non-programmers. The CLIs that come with the modern operating systems are not the only CLIs that are available. There are alternative CLIs, also known as CLI emulators, that are sometimes more powerful. Some of those CLI alternatives include Cygwin, PowerCMD, Console 2. Those are FOSS products, which are free and open source software. There are also proprietary products, including Reflection and Secure CRT. There is also a variety of CLI applications designed to be more effective for performing specific tasks. A user's ability to effectively use the CLI may be determined by the user's level of computing or the user's needs. I think that it is important that any user does not just automatically write off the command line as being obsolete or outdated, because it is still the most powerful tool that users have for interacting with their system and for having control over their system's resources. The command line interface and the graphical user interface does provide computer users with a choice so that they are not limited to only one option and therefore limited in the functions that they can perform. Until the GUI sufficiently evolves, the CLI will be an indispensable tool.